They say there's no greater humiliation than being abandoned at the altar. But what if you arrive to find your own twin sister already standing there, wearing your future like a stolen dress? That's exactly what happened to Elena Ward on what should have been the happiest day of her life. In front of 200 witnesses, her world shattered, until the most dangerous man in the province stepped from the shadows and offered her something no one expected. This is the story of how one moment of betrayal became the greatest turning point of her life. If you're watching from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere between, stay until the end to see how Elena turned public disgrace into absolute victory. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's begin. The morning had started with such promise. Elena Ward stood before the tall mirror in her childhood bedroom, her hands smoothing down the ivory silk of her gown for the 100th time. The dress had been her mother's, carefully preserved in lavender and tissue paper for 26 years, waiting for this exact moment. The lace sleeves hugged her arms perfectly, and the train spread behind her like a whispered prayer. "You look beautiful," her maid, Mrs. Garrett, said softly, adjusting the delicate veil that cascaded from Elena's dark hair. Like an angel descended. Elena's reflection smiled back, but there was a tightness around her eyes that even powder couldn't hide. She'd barely slept. Dreams of the ceremony had plagued her all night, walking down the aisle, meeting Thomas Ashford's eyes, speaking vows that would bind them forever. It was a good match. Everyone said so. Thomas was heir to a considerable estate, handsome in a practiced way, and he'd courted her with all the proper formality for 6 months. Her father had been thrilled. The Ashford name carried weight in society, and their union would secure the Ward family's standing for generations. "Your father is waiting downstairs," Mrs. Garrett continued, pinning a final orange blossom into Elena's hair. "The carriage is ready." Elena took a deep breath, pressing one hand against the tight bodice of her gown. This was it. In less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Thomas Ashford, a wife. Eventually, a mother. Her life's trajectory was set, proper and predictable as the seasons. She gathered her skirts and descended the staircase carefully, each step measured. Her father, Richard Ward, stood at the bottom in his finest coat, his graying hair slicked back with pomade. When he saw her, his stern face softened. "Your mother would have been proud," he said simply, offering his arm. The words brought tears to Elena's eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying would ruin the careful work Mrs. Garrett had done on her face. Instead, she took her father's arm and allowed herself to be guided into the waiting carriage. The ride to the chapel took 15 minutes, winding through the cobblestone streets of Ashton Vale. Elena watched familiar landmarks pass by. The milliner's shop where she'd chosen her bonnet, the lending library where she'd spent countless afternoons, the park where Thomas had first asked permission to call on her. Everything was changing. This morning she was Elena Ward, spinster daughter of a minor gentleman. By afternoon she would be someone entirely new. The chapel came into view, its stone spire reaching toward the gray autumn sky. Carriages already lined the street, guests arriving early to secure good seats. Elena's stomach twisted. 200 people would be watching her today. 200 witnesses to the most important moment of her life. The carriage rolled to a stop at the side entrance, away from the main doors where curious eyes might glimpse the bride too early. It was tradition. The bride must remain unseen until the processional music began. "I'll go see if they're ready for us," her father said, climbing down from the carriage. "Wait here, my dear." Elena waited and waited. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. Through the small carriage window, she could see guests still arriving, laughing and chatting as they climbed the chapel steps. The bells had already chimed the hour. Shouldn't the ceremony have started by now? A cold finger of unease traced down her spine. Finally, her father returned. But something was wrong. His face had gone pale, and his hands trembled as he opened the carriage door. "Father? What's happened?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "Elena, There's been some confusion. We should wait a bit longer before—" "Confusion?" Elena gathered her skirts and stepped down from the carriage despite his protests. "The ceremony should have started 10 minutes ago. What kind of confusion?" "Please, just wait here. Let me speak with Thomas first." But Elena was already moving toward the chapel entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. Something was very, very wrong. She could feel it in the air, taste it like copper on her tongue. The side door opened into a small vestibule. From there, she could hear the organ music swelling, the familiar strains of the processional hymn filling the chapel's vaulted space. The ceremony had started, without her. Elena pushed through the inner doors, and the sight before her turned her blood to ice. The chapel was full, every pew packed with guests in their finest clothes. Flowers adorned every surface, white roses and autumn branches, exactly as she'd requested. Candles flickered in elaborate candelabras. And there, at the altar, stood Thomas Ashford in his wedding coat. Beside him, in a gown of pristine white silk, stood her twin sister, Lillian. The world tilted. Elena grabbed the door frame to keep from falling, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But it was real. Devastatingly, impossibly real. Thomas and Lillian stood together before Father Benedict, hands clasped, speaking vows in voices too low for Elena to hear from this distance. The guests watched with rapt attention, smiling and nodding as the couple pledged themselves to each other. Her couple, her vows, her wedding, stolen. The organ music swelled to a crescendo, and in that moment, someone in the congregation turned and saw Elena standing frozen in the doorway. Then another person turned, and another. A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the chapel like wildfire. Lillian heard it first. She turned, her face, so identical to Elena's own, registering something between surprise and triumph. Thomas followed her gaze, and the color drained from his face when he saw his intended bride standing at the back of the chapel in her mother's wedding gown. Elena? He breathed her name like a question, like an accusation. The entire congregation had turned now, 200 faces swiveling between the bride at the altar and the bride at the door. The organ stuttered to a discordant halt. Father Benedict's mouth fell open in confusion. For a moment, absolute silence reigned. Then the whispers began in earnest, a rising tide of scandal and speculation. Is that Elena Ward? Good heavens, there are two of them. Did you know she had a twin? Which one is he actually marrying? This is extraordinary. The scandal. Elena felt their eyes on her like physical touches, probing and judging and drinking in every detail of her shock and humiliation. Her hands shook so badly she had to clutch them together to hide the trembling. Pride. That was all she had left. She couldn't collapse here. Couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She forced herself to stand straighter, to meet Thomas's guilty stare with what she hoped looked like composure rather than the screaming chaos that churned inside her chest. Thomas. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, carrying through the shocked silence. I seem to have arrived at an inconvenient moment. Nervous laughter rippled through the congregation. Someone coughed. The tension in the chapel was thick enough to choke on. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Elena, I can explain. Can you? She took a step forward, her silk train whispering against the stone floor. Please do. Explain to me how you came to be marrying my sister on the day you were contracted to marry me. Lillian's chin lifted defiantly. Unlike Elena, whose dark hair was simply dressed with flowers, Lillian wore an elaborate arrangement of pearl pins and diamond clips that caught the candlelight. Her gown was newer, finer, more expensive. She'd always had a talent for acquiring beautiful things. We're in love, Lillian announced, her voice ringing through the chapel with theatrical conviction. True love, Elena. Something you wouldn't understand. You always saw marriage as a duty, a business arrangement. Thomas and I, we have a connection of souls. The words hit like slaps. Elena felt her father's hand on her shoulder. He'd followed her inside, but she shrugged it off. This moment was hers to face alone. A connection of souls, Elena repeated slowly. How extraordinary that this connection only manifested after the contracts were signed, after the announcements were published, after the wedding breakfast was ordered and the guests were invited. Thomas flinched. Elena, please understand. What I understand, Elena cut him off, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, is that you are a coward, Thomas Ashford. If you wanted to marry my sister, you could have broken our engagement honorably weeks ago. Instead, you chose to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. Now see here. Thomas's face flushed red. You make it sound calculated. It wasn't like that. Lillian and I, we tried to fight it, but some things are bigger than honor, bigger than contracts. Love? Elena supplied bitterly. How convenient for you both. Don't be cruel, Elena, Lillian said, and somehow she managed to make herself sound like the wounded party. Just because you can't feel passion doesn't mean the rest of us should suffer in loveless arrangements. I did you a favor. You would have made Thomas miserable with your cold ways, your books, and your prudishness. Enough. The word cracked through the chapel like a whip. But it hadn't come from Elena. It had come from somewhere near the entrance, a male voice full of authority and barely contained fury. Every head turned. A man stood in the chapel doorway, and the sight of him sent a fresh wave of whispers through the congregation. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his black coat with an almost military precision. His hair was dark, his features sharp and aristocratic, and his eyes were the cold gray of a winter storm. Duke Adrian Hale. Even Elena, shocked and reeling as she was, felt a jolt of recognition. Everyone in 3 counties knew of the Duke of Hale, though few had actually seen him. He rarely attended social functions, never participated in the London season, and ran his vast estate with an iron fist from behind the walls of Halecrest Manor. They called him the Iron Duke. Some said he'd killed a man in a duel. Others whispered that he'd driven his own father to madness. No one knew the full truth, but everyone agreed on one thing. Adrian Hale was not a man to be crossed. What in heaven's name was he doing here? The Duke walked forward with measured steps, his boots clicking against the stone floor. The crowd parted before him instinctively, creating a clear path down the center aisle. His eyes swept over the scene, the bride at the altar, the groom frozen in guilt, the woman in white standing alone at the back, and his jaw tightened. He stopped beside Elena. Up close, he was even more imposing, radiating the kind of power that came from bloodline and wealth and absolute certainty in one's place in the world. "Miss Ward," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface. "I apologize for this interruption, but I believe I may be of service." Elena stared at him, utterly confused. "Your Grace, I don't understand. It's quite simple." The Duke turned to face the congregation, addressing them with the easy command of someone used to being obeyed. "I came here today to attend what I believed would be the wedding of Miss Elena Ward to Mr. Thomas Ashford. Instead, I find a rather different ceremony taking place." He paused, letting the words sink in. Thomas looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Lillian's triumphant expression had faded to uncertainty. "It seems to me," the Duke continued, "that Miss Elena Ward finds herself in an untenable position. She arrived here in good faith, prepared to fulfill a contract, only to discover that she has been betrayed in the most public and humiliating manner possible." More whispers, more stares. Elena wanted to vanish, to run from this chapel and never return, but the Duke's presence beside her felt like an anchor, solid and immovable. "Therefore," Duke Adrian said, and now he turned to look directly at Elena, "I propose an alternative solution to this predicament." Elena's heart hammered. "Your Grace?" He took her trembling hand in his, and the touch sent a shock through her system. His hands were warm, steady, calloused in a way that spoke of riding and sword work rather than the soft palms of a gentleman who'd never done a day's real labor. "Miss Elena Ward," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The chapel exploded. Gasps, shouts, someone screamed. The whispers became a roar of speculation and disbelief. Father Benedict looked like he might faint. Thomas's face went from red to purple. And Lillian looked absolutely murderous. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The Duke of Hale was proposing marriage to her, here, now, in front of 200 witnesses who'd come to watch her humiliation. She tried to form words, but they stuck in her throat. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly—" "Consider the alternative," the Duke said, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "You can leave here alone, the object of pity and gossip for months to come. Or you can leave here as the future Duchess of Hale. The choice is yours, Miss Ward, but I urge you to choose quickly before your courage fails." He was right. She knew he was right. The scandal of being jilted at the altar would follow her forever. She'd be the sad spinster, the woman so undesirable that even her contracted fiancé had preferred her sister. Mothers would point her out as a cautionary tale. Young girls would whisper about her at parties. But if she married the Duke, if she actually went through with this insane proposal, everything would change. She wouldn't be the victim anymore. She'd be the woman who'd traded up, who'd landed the most eligible bachelor in the region minutes after being abandoned. It was mad. Absolutely mad. And yet, Elena looked at Thomas and Lillian standing at the altar, their faces tight with shock, and was that jealousy on Lillian's face? Yes, definite jealousy. Her sister, who'd always had everything, who'd always been the prettier one, the charming one, the one everyone preferred. Lillian had never expected this. Something fierce and defiant rose in Elena's chest. She turned back to the Duke and met his storm-gray eyes directly. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, Your Grace, I will marry you." The chapel erupted again, but Elena barely heard it. She was focused entirely on the slight curve of satisfaction that touched the Duke's hard mouth. "Father Benedict," the Duke called out, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I believe you have a ceremony to perform." "Unless there is some impediment to our union?" The priest stammered. "No, Your Grace, no impediment, but this is most irregular." "Life is irregular, Father. Shall we proceed?" Father Benedict looked at Thomas and Lillian, still standing at the altar in their wedding finery. "But I was in the middle of—" "You were in the middle of performing a ceremony between a man contracted to another woman," the Duke said coldly. "I'd advise you to cease that particular endeavor immediately, unless you'd like questions raised about the legality of such a union." Thomas found his voice at last. "Now wait just a moment. You've waited quite enough, Ashford." The Duke's tone could have frozen fire. "You had your chance at happiness with Miss Ward, and you chose to squander it in the most dishonorable fashion imaginable. The lady has accepted my proposal. Unless you'd like to contest it?" The threat in those words was unmistakable. Thomas, for all his faults, wasn't completely stupid. He knew the Duke of Hale could destroy him, financially, socially, possibly physically, with minimal effort. "No," Thomas muttered. "No contest." "Excellent." The Duke guided Elena forward toward the altar where her sister still stood frozen. "Miss Lillian Ward, I believe you're in my fiancé's spot." Lillian's face twisted with fury and humiliation. For a moment, Elena thought her sister might actually refuse to move. But then Lillian gathered her skirts and swept down from the altar, her head high but her eyes blazing with hatred. As she passed Elena, she leaned in close enough to whisper, "You'll regret this. He's a monster, Elena. Everyone knows it. You've traded one prison for another." But Elena didn't flinch. She was beyond fear now, beyond shame. She was running on pure, defiant adrenaline. The Duke led her up the altar steps, positioning them where Thomas and Lillian had stood just moments before. Father Benedict looked utterly bewildered, clutching his prayer book like a lifeline. "Your Grace, I must ask, do you have a license? Bans must be published." "I have a special license," the Duke said, producing a folded document from his coat pocket. "Obtained last week from the Archbishop himself. It permits me to marry any eligible woman of my choosing without delay." Father Benedict unfolded the document with shaking hands, examined it, and nodded slowly. "This appears to be in order." "Then let us begin," the Duke said, "unless anyone here has a legitimate objection to this union." His gaze swept the congregation like a challenge. No one spoke. Even Thomas had the sense to keep his mouth shut. Elena's hands trembled so badly she could barely hold them still. The Duke must have noticed because he took both her hands in his, steadying them with his firm grip. "Breathe," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "You're doing beautifully." Father Benedict began the ceremony, his voice uncertain at first but gaining strength as he progressed through the familiar words. Elena heard them as if from a great distance, her mind still reeling from the impossibility of what was happening. 20 minutes ago, she'd been about to marry Thomas Ashford. Now she was standing at the same altar, speaking the same vows but to an entirely different man. A duke, a stranger, a man she'd never even spoken to before today. Do you, Elena Catherine Ward, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked up at the Duke, at Adrian. His gray eyes met hers, steady and sure. I do, Elena said. And do you, Adrian Nicholas Hale, Duke of Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, he said, his voice absolute. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride. The Duke hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then he lowered his head and pressed his lips to Elena's in a kiss that was brief, formal, and somehow still managed to send heat flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes held something that might have been approval. Well done, Duchess, he murmured. Duchess. She was a duchess now. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Duke turned to face the congregation, still holding Elena's hand. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the Duchess of Hale. The chapel remained silent for one long, terrible moment. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then others joined in, and suddenly the entire congregation was applauding. Whether out of genuine joy or sheer shock, Elena couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. She'd done it. She'd taken the worst moment of her life and somehow, impossibly, turned it into a victory. As the Duke led her back down the aisle, Elena kept her head high and her spine straight. She didn't look at Thomas, didn't acknowledge Lillian. She looked only forward, toward whatever future awaited her as the wife of the Iron Duke. Outside the chapel, a magnificent black carriage waited, drawn by 4 matching horses and bearing the Hale coat of arms on its door. A footman helped Elena inside and the Duke climbed in after her. The door closed. The carriage rolled forward, and only then, sealed away from the staring eyes and gasping whispers, did Elena allow herself to shake. Are you going to faint? The Duke asked, not unkindly. No, Elena managed. No, I don't faint. Good. I dislike dramatics. She let out a laugh that sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. Your Grace, you just proposed marriage to a woman you've never met in front of 200 witnesses. If that isn't dramatic, I don't know what is. The corner of his mouth twitched. Fair point. And you may call me Adrian. We're married now, after all. Formality seems somewhat beside the point. Adrian, Elena tested the name on her tongue. And you should call me Elena. Elena. He settled back against the carriage seat, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. Well, Elena, I suppose you have questions. Several thousand, she admitted, starting with why. Why did you do that? You don't know me. We've never even been introduced. Why would you possibly want to marry me? Adrian was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the countryside rolled past. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Let's just say I recognized a fellow survivor when I saw one. You were about to be destroyed by that chapel full of vultures turned into a cautionary tale for every young woman in the county. I merely offered you a way out. A way out that involves you taking a complete stranger as your wife, Elena pointed out. That's hardly a small sacrifice. I needed a wife anyway, he said bluntly. The title requires an heir eventually. I'd been avoiding the issue, but my solicitors have been increasingly insistent. When I received the invitation to your wedding and saw you were marrying Ashford, I assumed you were the practical sort. A woman who understood that marriage is a transaction, not a romantic fantasy. And that's what you want? A transaction? It's what I require, Adrian corrected. I'm not interested in love, Elena. I don't believe in it, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I do believe in partnership, mutual respect, and upholding one's duties. Can you accept that? Elena considered his words carefully. After what she'd just witnessed, after seeing how quickly love could turn to betrayal, the idea of a marriage based on clear expectations rather than fickle emotions held a certain appeal. What would you expect from me? She asked. Loyalty? Discretion? Eventually an heir. Beyond that, you'd have considerable freedom. Halcrest Manor is yours to run as you see fit. You'll have your own household budget, your own apartments, your own schedule. I spend most of my time managing the estate and won't interfere with your pursuits. And what would I expect from you? protection, security, the Hale name, which carries significant weight. You'll never want for anything material, and I'll defend you against anyone who tries to harm you, including your charming sister and her new husband. It was a business arrangement, clearly stated and seemingly fair. Nothing like the romantic promises Thomas had whispered during their courtship. But then, those promises had proven worthless. "One more question," Elena said. "The real reason. Why did you help me today?" Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Because I know what it's like to be humiliated publicly, to have everyone watching and waiting for you to break. And I know what it takes to refuse to give them that satisfaction. When I saw you standing there in that chapel, holding yourself together through sheer will." He broke off, shaking his head. "I recognized strength when I saw it, that's all." Elena studied his face, seeing the truth beneath the careful control. Whatever had happened to Adrian Hale, whatever had forged him into the Iron Duke, had left scars that went deeper than flesh. "Thank you," she said simply, "for today. Whatever happens next, thank you for that." He nodded once, sharp and final. Then he turned back to the window, and they rode the rest of the way to Halecrest Manor in silence. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who'd just made an irrevocable decision and were gathering their courage for whatever came next. Elena looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly in her lap. Her mother's wedding ring, the one she'd planned to wear as Thomas's wife, remained in her reticule. On her finger instead was a heavy gold band bearing the Hale crest, placed there by Adrian during the ceremony. She was a duchess now, the Duchess of Hale, married to a man rumored to be as hard and cold as the stone walls of his manor. But she wasn't the jilted bride anymore. She wasn't the object of pity and gossip. She was a survivor. And as the black carriage carried her toward her new life, Elena Hale, allowed herself the smallest, most defiant smile. Let them talk. Let them speculate and whisper. She'd won. Halecrest Manor rose from the landscape like a declaration of power, all dark stone and sharp angles, with towers that pierced the gray sky and walls thick enough to withstand a siege. As the carriage rolled up the long gravel drive, Elena felt her breath catch. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. "Welcoming, isn't it?" Adrian said dryly, noting her expression. "It's impressive," Elena managed. "It's designed to intimidate. My grandfather built it during the border conflicts, when showing strength meant survival. The Hale family has always valued function over comfort." The carriage stopped before massive oak doors reinforced with iron. Servants materialized instantly. Footmen in severe black livery, their faces carefully blank as they helped Elena down. She wondered what they thought of their master arriving home with a bride no one had expected. A stern woman in a housekeeper's black dress waited at the entrance, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun that matched the rigid set of her shoulders. "Mrs. Bramwell," Adrian said, "this is the new Duchess of Hale. She'll require the Duchess's apartments prepared immediately." Mrs. Bramwell's eyes flickered over Elena with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. The borrowed wedding dress, the hastily arranged veil, the absence of any luggage or trousseau. Her lips thinned. "Of course, Your Grace. Though we received no notice of a wedding, the staff is unprepared for a duchess." "Then prepare them," Adrian said flatly. "My wife will be mistress of this house as of today. I expect her to be treated with appropriate respect." The emphasis on the last word made Mrs. Bramwell stiffen. "Naturally, Your Grace." But as Adrian moved past her into the entrance hall, the housekeeper's gaze lingered on Elena with something that looked uncomfortably like contempt. Elena lifted her chin and met the stare evenly, until Mrs. Bramwell looked away first. First battle won, she thought grimly. The entrance hall was cavernous, all stone and dark wood, with a grand staircase that split in two directions. Mounted weapons decorated the walls, swords, shields, even a pair of crossed lances. Everything spoke of martial history, of a family that had fought for every inch of what they possessed. "I'll show you to your rooms," Adrian said, already climbing the left staircase. "Mrs. Bramwell, send someone to collect the Duchess's belongings from the ward residence." "Your Grace," Elena said quickly, "I'd prefer to handle that myself. Tomorrow, perhaps." Adrian paused, studying her. Ashamed to face your father? No, but I'd rather not have servants gossiping about the state of my relationship with my family before I've been here a full day. Something that might have been approval crossed his face. Smart. Very well. Tomorrow you can take the carriage wherever you need. He led her through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past rooms shuttered and dark. The manor felt less like a home than a museum, preserved but not lived in. How many people live here? Elena asked. Just me, until today. The East Wing is closed off entirely, hasn't been used in a decade. The staff quarters are in the North Tower. Your apartments and mine occupy the second floor of the main house. Your apartments and mine, Elena repeated. Separate, then. I assumed you'd prefer privacy. Was I wrong? Heat crept up Elena's neck. They were married. Eventually there would need to be an heir, but apparently not yet. Not tonight. No, she said quietly. Privacy is fine. Adrian stopped before a set of double doors and pushed them open. The Duchess's apartments lay beyond, a suite of rooms that managed to be both grand and utterly impersonal. The sitting room held elegant furniture arranged with mathematical precision. Through another door, Elena glimpsed a bedroom with a massive four-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet. The previous Duchess died 15 years ago, Adrian said. My mother. No one has occupied these rooms since. You're free to change anything you'd like. Elena walked slowly through the space, trailing her fingers along the furniture. Everything was spotless but cold, as if the life had been carefully scrubbed away. What was she like? Your mother? Unhappy. Adrian's voice was clipped. She married my father for love and spent 20 years regretting it. He was a drunk and a gambler who nearly destroyed the estate. She died trying to birth an heir who might have been different from him. Instead, she got me, and the baby died anyway. The bitterness in his words made Elena turn. Adrian stood in the doorway, his face carefully neutral, but his hands were clenched at his sides. I'm sorry, Elena said. Don't be. It taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of romantic delusions. Love destroys people, Elena. It makes them weak and foolish. My mother loved my father, and it killed her as surely as the childbed fever. And yet you saved me today. That seems almost romantic. His jaw tightened. I saved you because I needed a wife and recognized a practical opportunity. Don't confuse convenience with sentiment. He turned to leave, then paused. Dinner is at 8. Mrs. Bramwell will send someone to help you dress. I'll have clothes sent up from town tomorrow, but for tonight there should be something in the wardrobes that can be altered quickly. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone in rooms that smelled faintly of lavender and disuse. She sank onto the edge of a chair, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. This morning, she'd been Elena Ward, preparing to marry a man she'd courted properly for months. Now she was the Duchess of Hale, trapped in a fortress with a husband who spoke of their marriage like a business merger. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. A young maid entered, barely 16, with red hair and freckles and eyes that darted nervously. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Sarah. Mrs. Bramwell sent me to help you prepare for dinner. Elena stood, grateful for something practical to focus on. Thank you, Sarah. Though I'm afraid I don't have anything to wear except this dress, and it's hardly appropriate for— Mrs. Bramwell had me bring these, Your Grace. Sarah gestured to the garments draped over her arm. They belonged to the previous Duchess. Mrs. Bramwell thought they might fit you with some quick adjustments. The dress Sarah held up was beautiful, deep green silk with delicate embroidery, but it had been made for a woman decades dead, a woman who died unhappy in this very house. It's lovely, Elena made herself say. Let's see if it fits. Sarah proved surprisingly skilled with needle and thread, taking in the waist and hem, while Elena stood still as a dressmaker's dummy. As the girl worked, Elena studied her reflection in the mirror. She looked different. The same face, the same dark hair and blue eyes, but something in her expression had changed. She looked harder, more guarded. If you don't mind my asking, Your Grace, Sarah said hesitantly, is it true? About the wedding? Elena stiffened. What have you heard? Just that His Grace married you right there in the chapel, after your intended married someone else instead. Everyone's talking about it. Cook says it's the most scandalous thing she's heard in 40 years. Of course the servants would know. Servants always knew everything. It's true, Elena said simply, though I'd appreciate if the staff could find more productive topics of conversation. Sarah's hand stilled. Oh, I didn't mean any disrespect, Your Grace. It's just, well, we're all a bit shocked. His Grace has never shown interest in marrying before. He's turned down every match proposed to him since he inherited the title. And then suddenly he married me, Elena finished. Yes, it's a surprise to everyone, including me. Sarah resumed her stitching, but Elena could feel the questions radiating from the girl. Finally, Sarah ventured, Will you be happy here, Your Grace? The question caught Elena off guard. I don't know, she answered honestly, but I'll survive. That's enough for now. By 8 o'clock, Elena descended to the dining room wearing the altered green dress and carrying what remained of her composure. Adrian waited at the head of a table that could have seated 30, looking impossibly remote in his formal evening clothes. You look well, he said, rising as she entered. The color suits you. It was your mother's. I know. Mrs. Bramwell has excellent recall for inventory. He pulled out a chair, not at the far end of the table, but immediately to his right. Sit. No point in shouting across the room. The meal that followed was extraordinary and utterly cheerless. Course after course appeared. Soup, fish, roasted game, vegetables and cream sauce, all prepared with obvious skill and absolutely no joy. Adrian ate with mechanical efficiency, saying little. Elena forced herself to match his pace, though her stomach churned too much to appreciate the food. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the clink of silverware and the occasional footstep of servants clearing dishes. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore. Does it ever feel less like a mausoleum? She asked. Adrian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Halicrest? The whole thing, the house, the meals, the formal distance. Does any of it ever feel like actual life? He set down his fork with precise care. This is my life, Elena. Has been for 15 years since I inherited the title at 19. I run the estate, manage the tenants, fulfill my obligations. That's what a duke does. But what do you want to do? Want? He said the word as if it were foreign. What I want is irrelevant. I have responsibilities. Everyone has responsibilities. That doesn't mean they have to live like they're already in their tomb. His eyes flashed with something. Anger? Pain? You've been Duchess for less than 6 hours, and you're already critiquing how I run my house? I'm critiquing how you run your life. There's a difference. They're the same thing. Adrian's control cracked, his voice rising. This house, this title, these responsibilities. They are my life. They're all I have, all I've ever had. My father destroyed nearly everything my family built over generations. I spent 15 years rebuilding it, restoring the estate, paying off debts, proving that a Hale could be trusted again. That required sacrifice. It required giving up childish notions of happiness and focusing on duty. And you think I don't understand sacrifice? Elena's own temper flared. I just walked away from everything I knew. My family, my friends, my entire future as I'd imagined it. I married a stranger to save myself from humiliation. Don't lecture me about duty and sacrifice when I'm sitting here in a dead woman's dress trying to figure out how to survive in this frozen mausoleum you call a home. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Adrian stared at her, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then, unexpectedly, his mouth quirked. Frozen mausoleum. That's what you think of Halecrest? Can you honestly say I'm wrong? He picked up his wine glass, considering. No, I suppose I can't. He took a long drink, then met her eyes. You're right. About more than you know. This place has been dead for a long time. I thought that was appropriate. Safe. Safe? Emotion destroys things, Elena. I've seen it. My father loved gambling more than his family and nearly ruined us. My mother loved my father, and it killed her spirit long before her body gave out. Love, passion, desire, they're weaknesses that lead to ruin. Or they're what make life worth living, Elena countered. That's a romantic notion. You'll learn better. Will I, or will you? The challenge sparked something in Adrian's eyes, surprise, maybe even respect. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed attention. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Someone grateful, compliant, a woman so desperate to escape scandal that she'd accept any situation without complaint. I am grateful, Elena said, but I'm not broken. You saved me from public humiliation, Adrian, but you didn't save me from having opinions or a spine. I'm beginning to see that. He stood, extending his hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. Elena hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He led her through the darkened corridors, past the shuttered rooms and silent halls, until they reached a heavy door she hadn't noticed before. He produced a key and unlocked it, pushing the door open to reveal a staircase spiraling upward. Where are we going? Elena asked. The North Tower, my refuge. They climbed in silence, Elena's borrowed dress whispering against the stone steps. At the top, another door opened into a circular room filled with the most beautiful chaos Elena had seen since arriving at Hellcrest. Books. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, crammed onto shelves that lined every wall from floor to ceiling. But these weren't the pristine, untouched volumes in the Manor's formal library. These books showed signs of life, cracked spines, dog-eared pages, slips of paper marking favorite passages. In the center of the room sat a worn leather chair beside a table covered in maps and correspondence. A telescope pointed toward the window. A violin rested in an open case. You read, Elena breathed, moving toward the nearest shelf. And play music when I can't sleep, and study astronomy, and correspond with scholars across Europe. Adrian watched her from the doorway. The Duke must be dignified, controlled, above reproach. But here, I can be just Adrian, a man who likes books more than people and would rather spend an evening with star charts than at a ball. Elena ran her fingers along the book spines, reading titles. Philosophy, natural sciences, poetry. Why are you showing me this? Because you're right. Hellcrest is a mausoleum. I made it that way deliberately, thinking isolation equaled strength. But you're here now, and you deserve to know that your husband isn't completely made of stone. Just mostly. The admission, vulnerable and unexpected, made Elena's chest tighten. She turned to face him. Thank you for trusting me with this. Don't mistake me, Adrian said quickly. This doesn't change the nature of our arrangement. We're still partners in a practical alliance, not lovers, not friends. I understand. Elena moved toward the window, looking out over the moonlit grounds. But perhaps we could be allies? People who don't lie to each other, at least? Allies. Adrian tested the word. That seems reasonable. Then, as your ally, I have a question. Ask. Today at the chapel, you said you had a special license prepared last week, but you didn't know what would happen with Thomas and Lillian. So why did you really have that license? Adrian was silent for so long Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and carefully controlled. I heard rumors 3 weeks ago. My steward's wife is friends with your family's cook, and she mentioned that your sister had been seen with Ashford multiple times, alone, in places an unmarried woman shouldn't be. I made inquiries. The stories were consistent. Lillian and Thomas had been conducting an affair for at least a month. And you didn't tell me? Elena's voice sharpened. I didn't know you. What was I supposed to do, send a letter to a stranger saying her fiancé was unfaithful? You wouldn't have believed me. No one believes the Iron Duke when he speaks against respectable society figures. They'd have said I was jealous or mad. So you got a marriage license instead? I got the license because I knew what would happen. Lillian is exactly like her mother was, beautiful, charming, and utterly ruthless. I knew she'd find a way to take what she wanted, and I knew it would be public and humiliating, so I prepared for the possibility that you might need a way out. Elena stared at him, trying to process this. That's either incredibly kind or deeply calculating. It's both. I needed a wife, you needed rescue. When I saw you standing in that chapel, holding yourself together through sheer will while everyone waited for you to collapse, he shook his head. I knew you'd survive this marriage, more than survive it. Thrive, maybe, if given the chance. And if I hadn't accepted your proposal? Then I'd have returned to Halecrest alone, and you'd have gone home to face the scandal. We'd both have continued as we were. Miserable. I prefer the term solitary. It's the same thing, Adrian's mouth quirked again, that almost smile that softened his harsh features. You're determined to provoke me, aren't you? Someone has to, otherwise you'll turn completely to stone, and then where will I be? Married to a statue. He laughed, actually laughed, a sound of genuine amusement that transformed his entire face. For a moment, Elena glimpsed who Adrian Hale might have been if life had been kinder to him. I think, he said slowly, that you're going to be very dangerous to my carefully maintained isolation. Good. You need some danger in your life. I'm starting to realize that. They stood there in the tower room surrounded by books and star charts, and for the first time since the carriage ride from the chapel, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than fraught. But the moment shattered when hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Mrs. Bramwell appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with exertion. Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation. Lord and Lady Ashford have arrived with your sister, demanding to speak with you immediately. They're in the entrance hall and refusing to leave until they've seen both you and the Duchess. Elena's stomach dropped. Thomas and Lillian. Here. Already. Adrian's expression hardened back into ducal coldness. Tell them to make an appointment through proper channels. We don't receive unannounced visitors. I tried, Your Grace, but they're making quite a scene. Lord Ashford is threatening legal action, claiming the marriage is invalid because... Mrs. Bramwell hesitated, glancing at Elena. Because the Duchess was still technically contracted to him when you married her. The contract was void the moment he married another woman, Adrian said flatly. He has no legal standing. Perhaps not, Your Grace, but he's shouting loud enough to wake the dead, and some of the staff are getting frightened. Adrian swore under his breath. Fine. We'll deal with this now. He turned to Elena. You don't have to come. I can send them away. But Elena was already moving toward the stairs. No, I want to face them. I need to. Elena, they came here to intimidate me, to make me feel small and ashamed. I won't give them that satisfaction. She started down the stairs, her borrowed dress swishing against the stone. Besides, I'm the Duchess of Hale now. Time to start acting like it. Adrian followed close behind, and Elena could have sworn she heard admiration in his voice when he muttered, Dangerous indeed. They descended to the entrance hall where Thomas paced like a caged animal, his face red with fury. Lillian stood beside him in a traveling cloak, looking beautiful and cold as winter. And there, Elena's heart clenched, stood her father, Richard Ward, looking older and more worn than she'd ever seen him. The moment Thomas saw Elena, he charged forward. There you are. This farce has gone far enough, Elena. The marriage is invalid. You were contracted to me, a contract you violated when you married my sister, Elena said, her voice carrying through the hall with the Duchess's authority. I owe you nothing, Thomas. Not loyalty, not explanation, and certainly not my presence in your life. You did this to humiliate us, Lillian hissed. Married a duke just to make me look bad. I married a duke because he offered me respect when you offered me betrayal. Elena cut her off. Everything else is just your vanity speaking. Respect? Lillian laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Oh, sister, you really don't know, do you? You think he chose you for your strength, your dignity? She turned her vicious smile on Adrian. Tell her, Your Grace. Tell her the real reason you've been planning this. Adrian's face remained impassive. I have no idea what you're talking about, Miss Ward. Or should I say, Mrs. Ashford. You're married now as well, I believe. Congratulations on that, by the way. You make a lovely couple. The dismissive tone made Lillian's cheeks flush. Don't play innocent. I know you tried to court me last season in London. You sent me flowers? Asked me to dance at the Pemberton ball? I sent flowers to Lady Pemberton as a courtesy for the invitation, Adrian interrupted coldly. As for dancing, you asked me, and I accepted out of politeness. If you interpreted common courtesy as courtship, that's your delusion, not my intention. Liar! Lillian's composure cracked. You wanted me, and when I rejected you, you decided to steal my sister as revenge. I rejected you, Adrian said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You made advances that were inappropriate for an unmarried woman, and I made it clear I wasn't interested. You're beautiful, Miss Ward, but beauty without character holds no appeal for me. How dare you! How dare I tell the truth? Adrian stepped forward, and something in his presence made even Thomas back up a step. Let me make something very clear to all of you. I married Elena because I chose to. Not as revenge, not as a game, but because I saw in her something worth keeping. She has dignity, intelligence, and courage, qualities that apparently run thin in the Ward bloodline. Richard Ward flinched as if struck. Your Grace, please, I only came to ensure my daughter is safe. Your daughter is perfectly safe, Adrian said, his tone softening fractionally. And she's welcome to visit you whenever she wishes. But as for these two, he gestured dismissively at Thomas and Lillian. They're not welcome at Halecrest now or ever. If you come here again, I'll have you removed by force. Are we clear? Thomas's face purpled. You can't threaten me, Hale. My family has connections. So does mine. Rather more powerful ones, I'm afraid. Would you like to test them? Adrian's smile was cold as ice. I'm a duke, Ashford. You're a minor lord who just publicly humiliated his contracted bride. In any contest of social standing, you lose. In any contest of wealth, you lose. And in any physical contest, his eyes glittered dangerously. Well, we both know how that would end. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Lillian grabbed Thomas's arm. Come on, we don't need to stay here and be insulted. Actually, you came here to insult us, Elena said quietly. You just weren't expecting us to fight back. Lillian turned on her sister with pure venom in her eyes. You think you've won something? You're trapped in this tomb with a man everyone knows is half mad. Father, tell her the stories about the Duke. That's enough, Lillian, Richard said wearily. We're leaving. But Lillian wasn't finished. He killed his own father, Elena. Everyone says so. Pushed him down the stairs when the old Duke was drunk. No one could prove it, but everyone knows. And now you're married to him, alone in this fortress, and when he gets tired of you, get out. Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. Now, before I forget I'm a gentleman. Thomas finally showed some sense and dragged Lillian toward the door. But as they left, Lillian called back over her shoulder, You'll see, Elena. You'll see what kind of monster you've married. And when you do, don't come crying to me. The door slammed behind them, leaving Elena and Adrian alone in the entrance hall with Richard Ward. Her father stood there, hat in his hands, looking broken and old. Elena, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were planning. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, Father. And she did. Richard Ward was many things, distant, formal, demanding, but he wasn't cruel. But you knew something was wrong. You tried to stop me from entering the chapel. I just found out myself. Thomas told me minutes before the ceremony began that he was marrying Lillian instead. He claimed you'd given your blessing. Richard's voice shook. I should have stopped it. Should have dragged him out of that chapel by his collar. Instead, I froze. And you suffered for it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. I survived. You did more than survive. You turned a disaster into a triumph. Richard looked at Adrian with something like respect. Your Grace, I don't know what you saw in my daughter that made you offer marriage, but I'm grateful for it. You saved her when I failed to. I didn't save her, Adrian said quietly. She saved herself. I just provided an opportunity. Richard nodded slowly, then turned back to Elena. Your things will be sent here tomorrow. Your mother's jewelry, your books, everything that's yours. And if you ever need anything, his voice broke. You're my daughter. That hasn't changed. Thank you, Father. After Richard left, silence filled the entrance hall. Elena stood very still, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on her shoulders. Is it true, she asked without looking at Adrian, what Lillian said about your father? Which part? That he was a drunk? Yes. That he died falling down the stairs? Also yes. That I pushed him? Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. No one will ever know for certain. I found him at the bottom of the stairs one morning. The physician ruled it an accident. He'd been drinking heavily and likely lost his balance. But people talk. They always talk. Did you push him? No. The word was flat and final. But I won't pretend I grieved for him. He beat my mother, squandered the estate's wealth, and made my childhood a living nightmare. If I'd found him at the top of those stairs instead of the bottom, would I have pushed him? Adrian finally met her eyes. I honestly don't know. Does that frighten you? Elena considered the question carefully. The honest answer should have been yes. She was alone in this manor with a man rumored to have killed his own father, a man she barely knew, bound to him by vows that couldn't be undone. But when she looked at Adrian, really looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who'd been forged in the same kind of fire that had burned her today. Betrayal, humiliation, survival. No, she said finally. It doesn't frighten me. It makes you human. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Surprise, maybe even relief. You're either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. Elena managed a tired smile. It's been a very long day. That it has. Adrian offered his arm. Come. I'll walk you back to your apartments. They climbed the stairs together in silence, but it was different from the cold distance of earlier. They'd faced down their accusers together, stood unified against the people who wanted to see them fail. It wasn't friendship, wasn't love, but it was something. Partnership, maybe. The beginning of trust. At the door to her rooms, Adrian paused. What Lillian said about me courting her, it was a lie. I want you to know that. I know. How can you be sure? Because you're many things, Adrian, but you're not a liar. And because if you'd wanted Lillian, you could have had her. She may play at being pursued, but we both know she'd have accepted you in a heartbeat. Elena smiled wryly. My sister has many talents. Refusing a duke isn't one of them. Adrian's mouth quirked. No, I suspect not. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier. I chose you, not as a consolation prize, not as revenge. I chose you because you're stronger than you realize. The words wrapped around Elena's heart, warming something that had frozen solid in that chapel. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. You're stuck with me now in this frozen mausoleum. You may come to regret that. Or you may come to regret marrying a woman who refuses to let you hide in your tower forever. That, Adrian said softly, is a very real possibility. He bowed slightly, formal, proper, and turned to leave. But at the end of this corridor, he looked back. Sleep well, Duchess. Tomorrow we begin figuring out how to survive each other. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the weight of the day finally crashing down around her. She made it to the bedroom before the tears came. Not tears of sadness, but of pure exhausted relief. She'd survived. Against all odds, against public humiliation and family betrayal and her own terror, she'd survived. And more than that, she'd found an ally in the last place she'd expected. A husband who was cold and controlled and damaged in ways she was only beginning to understand, but who'd stood beside her when she needed it most. It wasn't the marriage she'd dreamed of as a girl. It wasn't love or romance or fairy tales, but it was real. It was honest, and perhaps in time it could be enough. Elena woke to gray morning light filtering through heavy curtains and the disorienting reality that everything had changed. She was no longer in her childhood bedroom. She was the Duchess of Hale, alone in a dead woman's apartments, married to a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. The weight of it settled over her like a physical thing. A soft knock at the door announced Sarah with breakfast, tea and toast arranged on a silver tray that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe back home. His Grace asked me to inform you that the modiste from town will be arriving at 10, Sarah said, setting the tray on a small table. And a letter arrived for you this morning, from the ward residence. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she took the envelope, her father's handwriting. She broke the seal and read quickly. The letter was brief and formal, Richard Ward informing his daughter that her belongings would be delivered that afternoon, along with her mother's jewelry and a small sum from her dowry that hadn't yet been transferred to the Ashford accounts. He closed with a single line that made her throat tight. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. Is everything all right, Your Grace? Sarah asked quietly. Yes, just adjusting. Elena set the letter aside and forced herself to eat, though the toast tasted like sand. The modiste arrived precisely at 10, a sharp-eyed Frenchwoman named Madame Laurent, who swept into Elena's sitting room with an assistant carrying bolts of fabric and a leather case of measuring tools. "So," Madame Laurent said, circling Elena with the assessing gaze of a general surveying troops, "you are the one who captured the Iron Duke. Very interesting. I wouldn't say I captured him." "No? Then what would you say?" "I'd say we made a practical arrangement." Madame Laurent's laugh was surprisingly warm. "Ah, you are honest. Good. I cannot work with women who lie to themselves about their marriages. Now strip to your chemise. I must see what I'm working with." Over the next 2 hours, Elena was measured, pinned, draped in fabrics, and interrogated about her preferences. Madame Laurent proved to be both highly skilled and surprisingly insightful. The Duke specified I should create a complete wardrobe: morning dresses, afternoon gowns, evening wear, riding habits, everything a duchess requires, the modiste explained, pinning a length of deep sapphire silk against Elena's shoulder. He was very specific about quality. Only the finest materials, nothing cheap, nothing second-rate. He wants you dressed appropriately for your station. "And what station is that?" Elena asked. "Trophy wife in a loveless marriage?" Madame Laurent's eyes gleamed. "You are sharper than you look, Your Grace, but also sadder. The Duke did not strike me as a cruel man when I spoke with him. Cold, yes. Controlled, certainly, but not cruel." "You've met him?" "I've been dressing the Hale family for 20 years. I made his mother's gowns before she died. I even made the Duke's christening gown, though he would not remember." Madame Laurent stepped back, studying the drape of the fabric critically. The old Duchess was a gentlewoman married to a violent man. She wore her sadness like a second dress. But you are different. You have steel in you. Elena met the modiste's eyes in the mirror. "I'm going to need it, aren't I?" "In this house? Yes. The Duke may be honorable, but he is also damaged, and the society you will move in, they will not be kind. There are already whispers, Your Grace, about your hurried wedding, about your sister, about what kind of woman would marry the Iron Duke on the same day she was meant to marry another. Let them whisper. Brave words, but whispers become knives when wielded by the right hands. You would be wise to prepare yourself." The warning proved prophetic when Adrian found Elena in the library that afternoon. She'd been exploring the vast collection, running her fingers along leather spines and pulling out volumes at random when he appeared in the doorway. "There you are," he said. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "What's happened?" Adrian moved to the window, his posture rigid. "I've received word from my contacts in town. The scandal is spreading faster than anticipated. Your sister has been quite busy spreading her version of events." "What version?" "That I've been obsessed with her for months, that I proposed to you out of spite when she rejected me, that you—" His jaw tightened. "That you seduced me deliberately to steal your sister's admirer." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "That's insane. We'd never even met before yesterday." "I know that, you know that. But society loves a good scandal, and Lillian is very convincing. She's positioned herself as the tragic heroine, the beautiful woman caught between two men, forced to choose love over wealth. And I'm the jealous sister who manipulated a duke into marriage." Elena sank into a chair, feeling sick. "Of course. Why ruin just one life when you can destroy two?" Adrian turned from the window, his expression grim. "There's more. Lord Pemberton is hosting his annual autumn ball in 3 weeks. It's the social event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. We've been invited. Actually, we've been specifically requested to attend." "They want to see the scandal firsthand." "Exactly. Lord Pemberton's wife thrives on drama. She's probably already planning how to arrange the seating to maximize awkwardness. Thomas and Lillian will be there as well." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. "Then we don't go. We stay here. Let the gossip die down naturally. That would be seen as cowardice or guilt. Either way, it confirms their narrative." Adrian moved closer, his voice softening slightly. "I know it's asking a lot, but if we attend together, unified, and conduct ourselves with dignity, we control the narrative. We show them that we have nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. Easy for you to say, you're not the one being painted as a scheming seductress. No, I'm just the half-mad duke who murders his relatives and preys on vulnerable women. Adrian's smile was bitter. We're both fighting our reputations, Elena. Mine just happens to be older. She looked up at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. He understood. He'd been living under the weight of rumors and suspicion for 15 years. What was 3 weeks compared to that? All right, Elena said quietly. We'll go. But I'll need a proper gown, something that makes me look like a duchess, not a frightened girl. Madame Laurent will handle it. I've given her carte blanche. Adrian hesitated, then added, and we should practice. Practice what? Being a married couple. In public, we need to appear united, comfortable with each other. Right now, we're still strangers. That shows. He was right, of course. They moved around each other with careful politeness, always maintaining distance. To the outside world, it probably looked exactly like what it was, a marriage of convenience between two people who barely knew each other. What do you suggest? Elena asked. Spend time together, not just formal dinners in silence. Actually talk, learn each other's patterns, become, he searched for the word, familiar. Over the following days, they fell into a strange new rhythm. Adrian showed Elena the estate, the tenant farms, the orchards, the stables where he kept a stable of horses that were clearly his pride. She discovered he was an excellent rider and a surprisingly patient teacher when he offered to help her improve her own skills. Elena, in turn, brought life to the silent halls of Hellcrest. She opened the shuttered windows in the east wing, had Mrs. Bramwell air out the unused rooms, and began hosting small afternoon gatherings for the estate manager's wife and daughters, the first social events Hellcrest had seen in years. Slowly, grudgingly, the manor began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. But the specter of the upcoming ball loomed over everything. 2 weeks before the event, Elena was in the morning room reading when Mrs. Bramwell appeared, her expression even more pinched than usual. Your Grace, you have a visitor, your sister, Mrs. Ashford. She's quite insistent on seeing you. Elena's book slipped from her fingers. Lillian? Here? She arrived without notice in a hired carriage. Shall I send her away? Every instinct screamed yes, but curiosity, and perhaps a need for closure, won out. No, show her to the blue parlor, and Mrs. Bramwell, stay within earshot. The housekeeper's eyes gleamed with understanding. Of course, Your Grace. Lillian waited in the parlor, wearing a fashionable traveling dress and an expression Elena couldn't quite read. When Elena entered, her sister rose, clasping her hands together in an oddly nervous gesture. Elena, thank you for seeing me. I almost didn't. Elena remained standing, maintaining distance. What do you want, Lillian? To talk, privately, sister to sister. We stopped being sisters the moment you stole my wedding. Lillian flinched. I know you're angry. Angry? Elena's laugh was sharp. Angry doesn't begin to cover what I felt watching you marry my fiancé. Try humiliated, betrayed, destroyed. I never meant to hurt you. Then what did you mean to do? What possible outcome did you imagine when you planned this? Lillian's composure cracked slightly. I thought you'd understand. Thomas and I, we fell in love, Elena. Real love, not the practical arrangement you had with him. I thought once you saw us together, you'd realize you never really wanted him anyway. You thought I'd just step aside gracefully, smile, and give you my blessing while 200 people watched? I thought you'd be relieved. Lillian's voice rose. You never loved Thomas. You said yes because Father approved the match, because it was suitable. I did you a favor by freeing you from a loveless marriage. Elena stared at her sister, seeing the genuine conviction in Lillian's eyes. She actually believed this. She'd constructed a narrative where she was the heroine, saving Elena from a terrible fate, and nothing would shake that delusion. Is that what you tell yourself? Elena asked quietly. That you did this for me? I did it for all of us. You, me, Thomas. We all deserve happiness, don't we? And are you happy, Lillian? Truly happy? Something flickered across her sister's face, too quick to identify, but it looked almost like doubt. Of course. Thomas loves me. We're building a life together. Then why are you here? The question landed like a blow. Lillian's hands twisted together, and for the first time, Elena saw genuine fear in her sister's eyes. "Because I need you to know the truth," Lillian said, "about the Duke, about why he really married you." Elena's stomach clenched. "We've already established that he wasn't pursuing you. He wasn't pursuing me. But he did know about Thomas and me before the wedding." Lillian moved closer, her voice dropping. "Elena, the Duke has been planning this for weeks. He had investigators following us, documenting our meetings. He knew exactly what would happen at that chapel. He told me as much. He heard rumors and investigated. That's hardly sinister." "But why?" Lillian pressed. "Why would a duke care about the private affairs of minor nobility? Why go to such lengths to prepare for something that had nothing to do with him?" "Because he needed a wife and saw an opportunity. Because he wanted revenge." Lillian's eyes glittered with malicious certainty. "Think about it, Elena. The Duke of Hale, the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, suddenly decides to marry on the spot? A woman he's never met? That's not opportunity. That's calculation." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Revenge for what? For being rejected by society, for being called mad and dangerous, for being isolated in that fortress while everyone else lives normal lives. Lillian leaned in, her voice poisonous honey. "He saw a chance to humiliate the people who'd humiliated him. And you, poor desperate you, were the perfect pawn. Marry the jilted bride, make everyone talk about his generosity and nobility, prove he's better than all of us. You weren't his rescue, Elena. You were his revenge." The words hit like physical blows, each one finding weak spots Elena hadn't known existed. Because there was a horrible logic to it. Adrian had been too prepared, too ready with that marriage license. His proposal had been too perfectly timed, too calculated to have maximum impact. "You're lying," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Ask yourself, what did he gain from marrying you? A wife he doesn't love, a woman with no fortune or connections, a scandal that attached itself to his name. Unless the point was never you at all. Unless the point was proving that he could do whatever he wanted, marry whomever he chose, and society would bow to him anyway because he's a duke." "Get out." Elena's voice shook. "Get out of my house." "It's not your house, Elena. It's his. You're just living in it, playing at being Duchess while he uses you to fight his battles." Lillian moved toward the door, then paused. "I came here because despite everything, you're still my sister. I wanted to warn you before you got too attached, before you started believing the pretty lies about partnership and respect. The Duke married you for his own purposes. When those purposes are served, what do you think will happen to you?" "I said get out!" Lillian left, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Elena stood frozen in the parlor, her mind racing, Lillian's poison spreading through her thoughts like ink in water. Was it true? Had Adrian married her as some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? The timing had been too perfect, the preparation too thorough, and he'd admitted himself that he'd been planning for weeks, had obtained the marriage license in advance, had known what would happen. But he'd also been honest about it. He'd told her about the rumors, the investigation. He hadn't lied. Except maybe he had. Maybe the real lie was letting her believe she'd had any choice at all. Maybe every word he'd spoken about strength and partnership had been carefully crafted to make her feel empowered while he pulled the strings. Elena sank into a chair, her hands trembling. 3 weeks ago, she'd thought she knew her future. Then Lillian had stolen it. Then Adrian had offered her a new one. But what if that future was just another cage, gilded and polished, but still trapping her? She didn't know what to believe anymore. That evening, Adrian found her in the tower room, standing before the telescope and staring at nothing. "Mrs. Bramwell said your sister visited," he said from the doorway. "Are you all right?" Elena didn't turn around. "Did you marry me as revenge?" The silence stretched so long she finally had to look at him. Adrian stood very still, his face unreadable. "What did Lillian tell you?" he asked finally. "That you've been planning this for weeks, that I was never a rescue. I was a pawn in some game you're playing with society. That you married me to prove a point, not because you needed a wife." Elena's voice cracked. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me this was real." Adrian moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. What do you want the truth to be, Elena? I want you to be honest. I have been honest. I told you I heard rumors. I told you I investigated. I told you I obtained the license in advance. I never hid any of that. But you didn't tell me why. Not really. You said you needed a wife, that it was practical. But Lillian's right. You could have married anyone. Women would line up for the chance to be a duchess. Why me? Why go to such elaborate lengths for me? Adrian's jaw tightened. Because you deserved better than being pitied. Because I saw you refuse to break when everyone expected you to. Because... He stopped, something flickering across his face. Because for one moment in that chapel, I saw someone as angry and betrayed as I've been my entire life, and I thought maybe we could survive better together than apart. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You just don't like it because it's messy and human and doesn't fit into neat categories of right and wrong. Adrian's control was fraying, his voice rising. You want me to say I'm some scheming villain who manipulated you? Fine. I manipulated you. I prepared for a situation I knew would humiliate you, and I used it to my advantage. I married a woman I didn't know to solve a practical problem while also proving to society that I don't need their approval. Is that what you want to hear? I want to hear that I wasn't just a convenient solution to your problems. And I want to hear that you don't regret marrying me. Adrian's shout echoed off the stone walls. I want to hear that the past 3 weeks meant something, that we were building something real here. But we can't always get what we want, can we? Elena stared at him, seeing the raw vulnerability beneath his anger. This was the real Adrian, not the controlled duke or the cold aristocrat, but the damaged man beneath, terrified of connection but desperate for it anyway. Did you ever pursue Lillian? Elena asked quietly. The truth, Adrian. No matter how it sounds. He met her eyes directly. No. She made advances at a ball last season. I declined politely. When she persisted, I declined less politely. She didn't take rejection well. And when you heard she was involved with Thomas? I was relieved. It meant she'd moved on to tormenting someone else. Adrian's voice softened. Elena, I don't know what your sister told you, but I never wanted her. Beautiful women are a copper a dozen in London. Women with actual character? Those are rare. How do you know I have character? You didn't know me. I knew enough. I knew you showed up for that wedding even though some part of you must have suspected something was wrong. I knew you held yourself together in front of 200 people who wanted to see you collapse. And I knew when I offered you an escape, you were smart enough to take it, even though it meant marrying a stranger everyone calls mad. He took a step closer. That takes courage, Elena, and intelligence, and strength. Those are the qualities I wanted in a wife. Not beauty, not charm, strength. Elena wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to trust the sincerity in his eyes. But Lillian's poison was working through her veins, making her doubt everything. I need time, she whispered. I need to think. The ball is in 1 week. I know. If you don't want to go, we won't go. I won't force you to face them. And let Lillian win? Let her control the narrative? Elena's laugh was bitter. No, we'll go, but I need some distance, just for a few days. To clear my head. Adrian nodded slowly, his face closing off into ducal coldness again. Of course. Whatever you need, Duchess. The formal title hurt more than it should have. They'd been Adrian and Elena for 3 weeks. Now they were back to being strangers. He left without another word, and Elena sank to the floor among the books and star charts, feeling more alone than she had since that morning in the chapel. The next 5 days passed in cold silence. Adrian threw himself into estate business, riding out before dawn and returning after dark. Elena spent her time in the unused wings of the manor, bringing them back to life with a fervor that bordered on mania. If she kept moving, kept working, maybe she wouldn't have to think about the doubt eating her from the inside. Mrs. Bramwell watched with disapproval that slowly shifted to something that might have been respect. The young maids followed Elena's lead, opening windows and beating dust from furniture that hadn't been touched in a decade. Slowly, Hellecrest transformed, but the space between the Duke and Duchess remained frozen. The night before the ball, Madame Laurent delivered the gown, a masterpiece in midnight blue silk that made Elena look like a queen going to war. The modiste took one look at Elena's face and shook her head. You are preparing for battle, yes? Something like that. Then wear this. Madame Laurent produced a necklace from her case, sapphires and diamonds arranged in an intricate pattern. It belonged to the old Duchess. The Duke asked me to bring it for you. He said it would complete the ensemble. Elena's fingers trembled as she touched the cold stones. Adrian's mother's necklace. A gesture of what? Apology? Trust? Or just another move in whatever game they were playing? Tell the Duke thank you, Elena said quietly. Tell him yourself. He's waiting in the entrance hall to escort you. Elena's heart lurched. She hadn't seen Adrian in 5 days beyond glimpses across the manor. Now she had to face him, travel with him, spend an entire evening at his side pretending their marriage wasn't fracturing. She descended the staircase in her battle armor of silk and jewels. Adrian waited below in his formal evening clothes, looking every inch the powerful Duke. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes, admiration, longing, pain. You look magnificent, he said quietly. So do you. They stood awkwardly, the distance between them vast despite being only feet apart. Elena, before we go, Adrian started, but she cut him off. Not now. Let's survive tonight first, then we can talk. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well, the carriage is waiting. The drive to Pemberton Hall took an hour, and they spent it in silence, each staring out opposite windows. Elena's stomach churned with anxiety. In minutes, she'd face Lillian again, and Thomas, and everyone who'd witnessed her humiliation and had spent 3 weeks gossiping about her. She'd never felt less ready for anything in her life. Pemberton Hall blazed with light, every window glowing, music drifting through the air. Carriages lined the drive, and elegantly dressed guests climbed the steps in laughing groups. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Adrian noticed. Without a word, he took her gloved hand in his and squeezed gently. We face them together, he said. Whatever happens. She wanted to pull away, to maintain the cold distance, but she needed the comfort of his touch too much. Together, she whispered. They entered the ballroom, and conversation died. Every eye in the room turned to stare at the Duke and Duchess of Hale. Elena felt their gazes like physical touches, judging, speculating, hungry for scandal. And there, across the room, stood Lillian and Thomas. Her sister wore white, of course she did, still playing the innocent bride. But there was something brittle in Lillian's smile, something desperate in how she clung to Thomas's arm. Thomas looked worse. His face was flushed, his cravat slightly askew. He stared at Elena and Adrian with something that looked like hatred. Lord Pemberton materialized beside them, his rotund face gleaming with barely concealed delight. Your Grace! And the Duchess! How marvelous that you could attend. Everyone's been so eager to see you both. I'm sure they have, Adrian said coldly. You must allow me to make introductions. So many people are dying to meet the new Duchess. Before Elena could respond, Pemberton was steering them through the crowd, presenting them to one society matron after another. The women smiled with their mouths while their eyes calculated and judged. The men bowed with exaggerated courtesy that felt like mockery. And through it all, Elena felt Lillian's eyes on her back, watching, waiting. Finally, mercifully, Pemberton released them, and Elena found a moment to breathe. This was a mistake, she murmured to Adrian. We should leave. We just arrived. Leaving now would be Elena. The voice made her freeze. She turned slowly to find Lillian standing behind her, alone, her white dress somehow making her look more predatory than innocent. Lillian. You look well. Marriage to a duke suits you. Her sister's smile was poison sweet. Though I notice you and your husband seem rather distant. Trouble in paradise already? What do you want? To apologize. Lillian glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. What I said the other day? I was cruel. I let my own guilt make me lash out at you. Elena's eyes narrowed. And now you're suddenly sorry? Now I realize I was wrong. About the Duke, about his motives. I spoke to Thomas, and he helped me see that I was projecting my own fears onto your situation. Lillian's eyes glistened with what looked like genuine tears. You're my sister, Elena. My twin. We shared a womb. How can I not want you to be happy? It was a good performance. Lillian had always been good at performing. I appreciate the sentiment, Elena said carefully, but I think it's best if we maintain our distance. Of course. I understand. I needed you to know. The Duke didn't marry you for revenge. He married you because... Lillian leaned in close, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Well, I'll let him tell you himself. But Elena, be careful. Not all the dangers at Halecrest come from the past. Before Elena could respond, Lillian melted back into the crowd, leaving Elena's mind spinning. What did that mean? What danger? She turned to ask Adrian, but he was deep in conversation with Lord Pemberton and another gentleman. Elena stood alone at the edge of the ballroom, surrounded by people and utterly isolated. Then she saw him. Thomas, weaving through the crowd toward her, his face flushed with wine and something darker. "Elena," he said, too loud. "A word, now. We have nothing to discuss. We have everything to discuss." His hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to hurt. "You think you've won something, marrying that cold bastard? You've condemned yourself to a life of misery. Let go of me." Elena tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "He doesn't care about you. You're just another piece on his chessboard, another way to prove he's better than everyone else. And when he's done with you..." A hand clamped down on Thomas's shoulder, spinning him around. Adrian stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Touch my wife again," Adrian said quietly, "and you'll lose the hand. Am I clear?" Thomas paled but tried to bluster. You were assaulting the Duchess of Hale in a public ballroom. Release her. Now." Thomas's hand fell away. Elena stumbled back, her arm throbbing where he'd gripped her. The entire ballroom had fallen silent, watching the confrontation. "You can't threaten me, Hale," Thomas said, but his voice shook. "Everyone here saw she's my wife's sister. I have a right to speak with her. You have no rights where she's concerned. She's mine." Adrian's voice was cold steel. "My wife, my Duchess, under my protection. If you go near her again, I'll call you out, and we both know how that will end." A duel. Adrian was threatening a duel. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ladies whispered behind fans. Gentlemen exchanged shocked glances. Thomas backed away, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over, Hale. You think you can just... Enough!" The word cracked like a whip, but it hadn't come from Adrian. Lillian stood in the center of the ballroom, her face twisted with fury. "Enough pretending! Enough lies!" She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to theatrical heights. "You all want to know the truth about the Duke of Hale? About why he really married my sister?" Lillian's laugh was slightly hysterical. "He did it because I refused him first, the great Iron Duke, so powerful and untouchable, and I turned him down. So he took my sister out of spite, to punish me for daring to choose love over a title." "Lillian, stop." Elena tried, but her sister was beyond reason. "He pursued me for months, sent gifts, wrote letters, begged me to reconsider, and when I married Thomas instead, he couldn't stand it. So he orchestrated Elena's humiliation just to get back at me." The ballroom exploded in whispers. Every eye turned to Adrian, waiting for his response. Adrian stood absolutely still, his face carved from stone. When he spoke, his voice carried through the sudden silence. "You're lying." "Am I?" Lillian reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded paper. "Then explain this. A letter from the Duke of Hale, dated 2 months ago, declaring his undying affection and begging for just one more chance." She thrust the paper toward Elena. "Read it, sister. See what kind of man you married. See how he really feels." Elena took the letter with shaking hands. The paper was thick, expensive. The seal was definitely the Hale crest. She unfolded it and began to read. The words swam before her eyes. Declarations of love, pleas for reconsideration, promises of devotion. All addressed to Lillian, all signed in Adrian's distinctive hand. Elena looked up at her husband, seeing confirmation in his frozen expression. He'd lied. About everything. The room tilted. "Elena," Adrian started, but she couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. Her sister had been right. About all of it. Elena had been a pawn, a revenge plot, a way for Adrian to salvage his pride after Lillian's rejection. And she'd believed him, trusted him, started to care for him. Is it true? Her voice came out broken. Adrian, is it true? He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and she saw guilt there. Guilt and something that looked like grief. Let me explain. That was answer enough. Elena dropped the letter and ran. She pushed through the crowd, past the staring faces and gasping whispers, through the ballroom doors and down the corridor. She had to get away, had to breathe, had to think, but there was nowhere to go. No refuge, no safety. She was the Duchess of Hale, trapped in a marriage built on lies, and the whole world was watching her fall apart. Elena burst through a side door and found herself in the Pemberton Gardens, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The night pressed down on her, cold and merciless. Behind her, the ballroom buzzed with the scandal she'd just fed them. The jilted bride who'd married the Duke only to discover he'd wanted her sister all along. The story was too perfect, too tragic. They'd dine on it for months. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her stomach, trying to hold herself together. The letter. Adrian's handwriting, his declarations of love for Lillian, the guilt in his eyes when she'd asked if it was true, everything Lillian had warned her about, confirmed in ink and silence. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind her. Elena spun, expecting Adrian, but instead found Madame Laurent hurrying down the path, her face creased with concern. Your Grace, you must come inside. It's freezing and you have no cloak. I can't go back in there. Elena's voice cracked. I can't face them. Can't face him. Then at least come to the ladies' retiring room, away from prying eyes. Madame Laurent took Elena's arm gently. Come, child, before you catch your death. The modiste guided her to a small parlor where ladies went to repair torn hems and damaged dignity. Elena sank onto a velvet settee, her whole body trembling. Madame Laurent poured brandy from a crystal decanter and pressed the glass into Elena's hands. Drink, all of it. Elena obeyed, the liquor burning down her throat and spreading warmth through her chest. The shaking gradually subsided, leaving behind a hollow numbness. Now, Madame Laurent said, sitting beside her, tell me what happened. My sister showed everyone a letter from Adrian, declaring his love for her, begging her to reconsider rejecting him. Elena's laugh was bitter. Everything he told me was a lie. He did pursue Lillian. He did marry me as revenge. I was so stupid. May I see this letter? I dropped it in the ballroom. A shame. I would have liked to examine it. Madame Laurent's tone was oddly thoughtful. Your Grace, in 20 years of serving the Hale family, I have learned a few things about the Duke. He is many things. Cold, controlled, damaged, but he is not a liar. The evidence suggests otherwise. Does it? Or does it suggest that your sister is exactly as manipulative as you already know her to be? The modiste leaned forward. I made your sister's wedding dress, you know. She came for fittings 3 times. Each visit, she talked of nothing but catching a Duke. Not the Duke. Any Duke. She had a list. Elena looked up sharply. What? She spoke of her strategies, how to flatter, how to position herself at social events, how to make men compete for her attention. Your sister is beautiful, yes, but beauty fades. She knows this. What she wanted was security, status, and the power that comes with marrying well. Madame Laurent's eyes held steady sympathy. The Duke of Hale was at the top of her list, but when he showed no interest, she moved to Thomas Ashford, a lesser prize, but still acceptable. Then why would she have a letter from Adrian? An excellent question, one you should ask before you condemn your husband based on your sister's word alone. The modiste stood. The Duke is still in the ballroom. So is your sister. So is everyone who wants to see you broken. What will you do, Your Grace? Hide here and let them write your story, or go back and discover the truth for yourself? Elena stared at her hands, at the heavy ring bearing the Hale crest. 3 weeks ago, she'd stood in a chapel, humiliated and broken, and made a choice to fight back. She'd accepted Adrian's proposal not because she was desperate, but because she refused to be a victim. Had anything really changed, or was she just letting Lillian turn her into a victim again? Help me fix my face, Elena said quietly. I'm going back. Madame Laurent smiled with fierce approval. That's my Duchess. 5 minutes later, Elena walked back into the ballroom with her head high and her spine straight. The conversations didn't stop this time. Everyone was too busy watching the drama unfold to bother pretending otherwise. Adrian stood in the center of the room, still frozen where she'd left him, but his expression had shifted from guilt to something harder, colder. The Iron Duke fully armored. Lillian stood nearby, flushed with triumph, Thomas at her side, looking uncomfortable. Lord Pemberton hovered between them like a referee at a boxing match, clearly torn between shock and delight at the entertainment. Elena walked directly to Adrian, ignoring the gasps and whispers. When she reached him, she spoke clearly enough for the entire room to hear. I'd like to see that letter again. Lillian's smile faltered. Elena, there's no need to torture yourself. The letter, now. Someone had retrieved it from where Elena had dropped it. A footman brought it forward on a silver tray. Elena took it, unfolded it, and read it again. Slowly, this time. Carefully. The handwriting was similar to Adrian's, but not quite right. The flourishes were too elaborate, the loops too perfect. Adrian's hand was precise but functional. He wrote like someone who spent hours on correspondence and couldn't afford to waste time on decorative penmanship. This was someone copying his style. Practicing it. Almost getting it right, but not quite. This is a forgery, Elena said. The ballroom erupted. Don't be ridiculous, Lillian's voice went shrill. That's the Duke's seal, his signature that you copied. Elena turned to her sister, seeing the truth in Lillian's suddenly panicked eyes. You forged this letter. How long did it take you? Hours? Days? Practicing his handwriting until you could almost replicate it? That's absurd. Why would I? Because you needed insurance. Elena's voice rang with sudden certainty. You stole my wedding, Lillian, but you knew the scandal would eventually fade. People would move on to the next excitement. Unless you could keep the story alive, keep yourself at the center of it. So you created this letter as leverage, a way to prove you'd been the real prize all along. You're delusional. But Lillian's hands shook as she reached for the letter. Give that back. Elena held it away. Adrian, is this your handwriting? No. His voice was absolutely certain. It's a decent copy, but look at the H in my signature. I never closed the loop completely. A habit from university. This one is closed. Elena examined the signature and saw he was right. The difference was subtle, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. And the seal? Someone in the crowd asked. How do you explain the Hale seal? My seal went missing 6 months ago, Adrian said, his voice carrying through the ballroom. I thought I'd simply misplaced it and had a new one made. Now I know better. That's convenient, Thomas sneered, finally finding his courage again. Blaming my wife for your own... Shut up, Thomas! The words came from Lillian herself. Everyone turned to stare at her. Lillian's face had gone white, but her eyes blazed with something between fury and fear. Just shut up, you're making it worse. Making what worse, Lillian? Elena pressed. Tell them what you did. For a moment, Lillian seemed to consider fighting. Elena could see her calculating, searching for a way to spin this, to turn it back on Elena somehow. But she'd been caught, and she knew it. Fine. Lillian's voice dripped with venom. Yes, I forged the letter. Yes, I stole the seal during a visit to Halecrest last spring when I accompanied Mother to call on the old Duke. Yes, I planned all of it. The gasps were genuine this time, shocked and scandalized. But I did it because of you, Lillian pointed at Elena, her composure completely shattered. You've always been the good one, the dutiful one, the one Father praised. I was the pretty one, but that was all I had. So when I found out Thomas wanted to marry you, I took him. And when the Duke proposed to you, rescued you, made you look like the heroine of some romantic story, I couldn't stand it. You were supposed to be humiliated, ruined, pitied. Instead, you became a duchess while I got stuck with Thomas. Stuck with... I'm standing right here, Thomas sputtered. Oh, please, Lillian rounded on him. You're boring and poor, and you talk about hunting dogs constantly. I married you because the Duke wouldn't have me, and Elena was supposed to be too pathetic to steal. But she won. Again, just like always. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stared at her sister, her twin, her mirror image, and saw clearly for the first time who Lillian really was. Not the beautiful, charming girl everyone adored, but someone hollow and desperate, willing to destroy anyone to feel important. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elena said quietly. "But your feelings don't justify what you did. To me, to Thomas, to Adrian. You tried to ruin us out of jealousy, and you failed." "Failed?" Lillian's laugh was slightly unhinged. "You think exposing one forged letter means you've won? Everyone will still wonder if it's true. They'll always question whether the Duke really wanted you or whether you were just convenient." "That's enough." Adrian's voice cut through Lillian's tirade like a blade. He moved to Elena's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "You've said quite enough for one evening, Mrs. Ashford." He turned to face the assembled crowd, his ducal authority filling the room. "Since we're apparently airing private matters in public, allow me to clarify a few things. I never pursued Lillian Ward. She made unwanted advances that I politely refused. When she persisted, I refused less politely. When I heard she was entangled with Thomas Ashford, I was relieved to be free of her attention." He took Elena's hand, holding it firmly. "I married Elena because I recognized in her the same strength that kept me alive through my father's abuse and my mother's death. I married her because she refused to be broken by public humiliation. I married her because in that moment in the chapel, I saw someone worth fighting for." His voice softened, speaking to Elena rather than the crowd. "And every day since, she's proven me right. She brought life to a house that had been dead for 15 years. She showed me that survival isn't the same as living, and she had the courage to call me out when I was being a coward and hiding behind duty instead of admitting." He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "Admitting what?" Elena whispered. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his control cracked completely. Not in anger, but in something more vulnerable. "That I'm falling in love with you," he said, "and it terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." The ballroom disappeared. The crowd, Lillian, Thomas, the scandal, all of it faded until there was only Adrian, looking at her with naked honesty and fear. "You said love destroys people," Elena managed. "I was wrong. Fear destroys people. Love, real love, not the twisted obsession my father called love, that might actually save them." He lifted her hand to his lips. "If you'll let it. If you can forgive me for not realizing sooner what was happening between us." Elena's throat tightened. "You hurt me. When I asked if the letter was real, you looked guilty. Because I was. Not for writing it, but for making you doubt me. For not being clear enough about my feelings that one forged letter could shake your trust." His jaw tightened. "I've spent so long keeping people at a distance that I forgot how to let someone in. But Elena, I swear to you, on my mother's grave and my family's honor, I never wanted your sister. I only ever wanted you. Even in the chapel, when you barely knew me, especially then, you were magnificent in your fury, holding yourself together when anyone else would have collapsed. I took one look at you and thought, yes, her. Not as revenge, not as convenience, just yes." Elena searched his face, looking for any hint of deception, but all she saw was truth, raw and undefended. Around them, the ballroom had fallen silent again, but this time it felt different. Not hungry for scandal, but witnessing something genuine. "I'm falling in love with you too," Elena whispered, "and it terrifies me." Adrian's smile was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, relieved and joyful and utterly transforming. "Then we'll be terrified together." He pulled her close and kissed her, properly this time. Not the brief formal kiss from their wedding, but something deep and claiming and full of promise. Elena kissed him back, pouring 3 weeks of confusion and hurt and hope into it, feeling his arms wrap around her like fortress walls. When they finally broke apart, she became aware of applause rippling through the ballroom, not mocking or ironic, but genuine. People smiling, nodding, approving. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "Well, This has been the most extraordinary evening I've ever hosted. Undoubtedly, Adrian said dryly, not releasing Elena, though I'm afraid my wife and I will be cutting our visit short. Completely understandable, Your Grace. Pemberton hesitated, then added quietly, For what it's worth, I never believed the rumors about you, about your father's death or the rest of it. You're a good man who had a terrible father, that's all. Adrian nodded once, sharp with gratitude, but Lillian wasn't finished. She stood trembling with rage, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. You can't just leave. You can't just... Everyone heard what I did. I'll be ruined. Yes, Elena said simply. You will be, just as you tried to ruin me. The difference is I didn't deserve it. You can't do this to me. I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister the day you stole my wedding. Elena's voice was steady, final. You made your choices, Lillian. Now live with them. Thomas stood beside his wife, looking lost and pathetic. Elena, surely you don't mean, we're family, we can work this out. We're not family, Elena said. Not anymore. My family is standing beside me. Everything else is just people I used to know. She took Adrian's arm and together they walked toward the ballroom doors. The crowd parted before them and Elena heard the whispers starting, not cruel this time, but awed. Did you see the way he looked at her? A real love match, after all. The sister must be mad with jealousy. The Duke chose the right twin, that's certain. They made it to the entrance hall before Elena's composure finally cracked. She started laughing, half hysterical, tears streaming down her face. We actually just... She couldn't finish the sentence. Adrian pulled her close, his own shoulders shaking with laughter. We destroyed them, completely and publicly. Your mother's necklace survived, at least. Elena touched the sapphires at her throat. Though I'm fairly certain I violated every rule of proper behavior back there. Good. Proper behavior is overrated. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Are you all right, truly? I don't know. Ask me tomorrow when I'm not running on pure adrenaline and terror. Fair enough. He kissed her forehead gently. Let's go home. The carriage ride back to Hellcrest was nothing like their silent journey to the ball. Elena sat pressed against Adrian's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them still trembling with leftover shock. I should have told you sooner, Adrian said quietly. About my feelings. I kept thinking there would be time, that we could build to it slowly, properly. I didn't realize Lillian would force my hand. Maybe that's good. Maybe we both needed to be forced to be honest. Elena looked up at him. You really saw me in that chapel and thought yes? Immediately, completely, terrifyingly. His smile was rueful. I spent the entire wedding ceremony thinking I'd lost my mind. Who proposes to a stranger? Who marries someone they've never even spoken to? Someone very brave or very foolish. Both. Definitely both. He tightened his arm around her. But I'd do it again. Every single choice, every moment, I'd do it all again to end up here with you. Even the part where I called your house a frozen mausoleum? Especially that part. You were right. You've been right about a lot of things. Adrian's expression turned serious. I want to change, Elena. Not just the house, but me. I want to learn how to be more than just duty and responsibility. I want to learn how to be happy. Then we'll learn together. Elena settled more comfortably against him. Though I have one condition. Anything. No more secrets. No more careful distance and formal dinners in silence. If we're doing this, really doing this, we do it honestly. Completely. No more secrets, Adrian agreed. Though I warn you, complete honesty for me might be overwhelming. I have 15 years of repressed emotions to work through. I think I can handle it. Can you? Because I'm fairly certain I'm not falling in love with you. I've already fallen. Completely. Irrevocably. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep. You're in every room of Halecrest, even when you're not physically there. And the thought of anything happening to you makes me understand why my mother stayed with my father despite everything. Not because love is weak, but because it's so powerful it rewrites everything you thought you knew about yourself. Elena's breath caught. That's a lot. I warned you. No, I mean, She turned to face him fully. I mean, it's exactly what I needed to hear, because I feel the same way. You're supposed to be this cold, controlled duke, but I see the man underneath, the one who reads poetry in a tower room and plays violin when he can't sleep and treats his horses better than most people treat their children. I see you, Adrian, all of you, and I love what I see. They kissed again, longer this time, the carriage rocking gently as it carried them home. When they finally broke apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said at the ball, about being terrified. I know, so am I. Elena smiled. But being terrified together is better than being safe alone. Significantly better, Adrian agreed, though I reserve the right to occasionally retreat to my tower when emotions become overwhelming. Only if I can retreat with you. Deal. They arrived at Halcrest to find the entire staff waiting in the entrance hall, clearly having heard some version of events from the Pemberton servants. Mrs. Bramwell stood at the front, her expression unreadable. As Adrian helped Elena down from the carriage, the housekeeper stepped forward. Your Grace, Your Grace. She nodded to each of them in turn. The staff wishes you to know that we are honored to serve the House of Hale, both of you. It was as close to an apology and acceptance as Mrs. Bramwell would ever come. Elena saw approval in the older woman's eyes and something that might have been respect. Thank you, Mrs. Bramwell, Elena said quietly. That means a great deal. The housekeeper's mouth twitched in what might have been an almost smile. Will you be requiring anything this evening? Tea, perhaps? Or something stronger? Just our beds, Adrian said. It's been a very long day. But as they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Adrian didn't lead Elena to her apartments. Instead, he stopped at his own door. Stay with me tonight? He asked quietly. We don't have to. I just don't want to be alone. Don't want you to be alone. Elena's heart swelled. Yes. His rooms were warmer than hers, lived in rather than preserved. Books stacked on tables, maps spread across a desk, a violin case resting on a chair. The bedroom beyond held a massive bed that looked actually comfortable rather than decoratively formal. They helped each other undress with fumbling, nervous fingers, Adrian carefully unfastening the buttons down Elena's back, Elena unknotting his cravat with shaking hands. Not rushed or passionate, but tender. Learning each other. Finally, dressed in nightclothes borrowed from Adrian's wardrobe for Elena, they climbed into bed and held each other in the darkness. We won tonight, Elena whispered. Didn't we? We did. Adrian's voice was quiet against her hair. Though Lillian and Thomas will make our lives difficult when they can, society will gossip for months. There will be consequences. Let them come. We'll face them together. Together, Adrian agreed. Elena felt sleep pulling at her, exhaustion finally winning over adrenaline. But before she surrendered to it, she had one more question. Adrian, what made you go to that chapel? Really? You said you were invited to my wedding, but why actually attend? You don't go to social events. He was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he said very softly, because 3 weeks earlier, I saw you at the lending library in town. You were reading in the corner, completely absorbed, and you laughed at something in the book. Not a polite laugh, but real joy. And I thought I'd like to know what could make someone laugh like that. Elena's throat tightened. You went to my wedding because you saw me laugh at a library? I went because I was curious about the woman who could find such happiness in words. And when I got there and saw what was happening to you, his arms tightened around her. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand seeing that joy destroyed, so I offered you a way out. You saved me. We saved each other, Adrian corrected. I was drowning in duty and isolation. You gave me a reason to swim to shore. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, two people who'd been broken separately learning how to be whole together. And in the morning, when Elena woke to find Adrian still holding her, his face peaceful in sleep, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, scandal, society, Lillian's continued machinations, they would survive it, because they'd already survived the worst. And they'd done it together. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows that had been opened to let in the autumn air and the unfamiliar warmth of another person beside her. Adrian slept peacefully, his face younger and softer without the weight of ducal responsibility pressing down on it. She studied him in the morning light, the sharp line of his jaw, the dark lashes against his cheek, the way his hand remained curved around hers even in sleep. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a stranger, a legend, the Iron Duke who'd saved her from humiliation. Now he was simply Adrian, the man she loved. She must have shifted because his eyes opened, immediately alert, then softening when he saw her. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning." They lay there for a moment, neither quite ready to face whatever consequences awaited them beyond this room. Then Adrian sighed and sat up. "We can't hide forever, tempting as that sounds. The world will expect answers. Let them expect." But Elena rose as well, accepting the dressing gown Adrian offered her. "Though I suppose we should at least make an appearance before rumors spread that we've barricaded ourselves in out of shame. The only thing I'm ashamed of is waiting so long to be honest with you." Adrian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Everything else, Lillian, Thomas, the entire gossiping population of 3 counties, they can all go hang." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Bramwell's voice carried through the wood. "Your Grace? Your Grace? Forgive the intrusion, but there's a rather urgent matter requiring your attention." Adrian and Elena exchanged glances. "Enter," Adrian called. The housekeeper came in, her face carefully neutral despite finding the Duchess in the Duke's bedroom wearing his dressing gown. A letter arrived by express courier from Lord Pemberton. He marked it urgent. Adrian took the envelope, broke the seal, and read quickly. His expression shifted from curiosity to grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Pemberton writes that after we left last night, several other people came forward with information about Lillian. Apparently she's been spreading malicious gossip about various families for months. Lies about affairs, financial problems, illegitimate children. All designed to elevate her own status by destroying others." Adrian looked up from the letter. "Lady Pemberton herself was one of Lillian's victims. Your sister told people that Lady Pemberton's daughter was being sent abroad not for education, but because she'd gotten herself into trouble with a stable hand." Elena closed her eyes. "That's horrible. That poor girl's reputation is being restored. Pemberton has witnesses who can confirm the daughter was never anywhere near the stables, and that Lillian fabricated the entire story because Lady Pemberton had seated her at a lower table during a dinner party." Adrian continued reading. "He's writing to inform us that society has turned decisively against your sister. The Ashfords are being cut from invitation lists, and Thomas's family is considering disowning him for the embarrassment." Elena should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, she just felt tired and sad. "She did this to herself," Adrian said gently, reading her expression. "You know that, don't you? You gave her every chance to stop, to be honest, to choose differently. She refused." "I know, but she's still—" Elena stopped, realizing the truth. "No, she's not my sister anymore. Not in any way that matters. My sister is a memory of a girl who disappeared years ago, if she ever really existed at all." "Then let the memory go." Adrian set the letter aside and took both her hands. "We have more important things to focus on, like building an actual life together instead of just surviving." Over the next week, they did exactly that. Adrian taught Elena to ride properly, not the sedate side-saddle trot considered appropriate for ladies, but real riding, astride racing across the estate's fields with the wind in her hair and freedom singing through her veins. She taught him to laugh again, to find joy in small things like good books and terrible puns and the way the light hit the manor walls at sunset. They opened more of the house, room by room, letting air and light into spaces that had been sealed for years. Elena discovered a music room with a pianoforte that just needed tuning, a conservatory perfect for growing winter flowers, and a whole wing of guest rooms that could be prepared for actual guests. "We should host something," Elena said one afternoon as they explored a ballroom that hadn't been used since Adrian's mother died. "A proper party. Show everyone that Halcrest isn't a tomb anymore." Adrian looked skeptical. "The same everyone who spent weeks gossiping about us? Especially them. Let them come here and see us happy. Let them see what they tried to destroy and failed." Elena spun in the center of the empty ballroom, her skirts flaring. Besides, this room is too beautiful to stay empty. You just want an excuse to dance. I want an excuse to dance with you. There's a difference. Adrian caught her mid-spin, pulling her close. We don't need an excuse for that. He hummed a waltz melody, and they moved together across the dusty floor, neither of them particularly graceful, but both laughing too hard to care. When the impromptu dance ended, Adrian kept holding her, his expression turning serious. I love you, he said. I know I said it at the ball, but I wanted to say it again when we're alone. When there's no pressure, no audience, just us. I love you, Elena. I love you too. The words came easily now, natural as breathing. Even when you're being brooding and ducal. Especially when I'm being brooding and ducal. Well, it is rather attractive in a terrifying sort of way. They were kissing when Mrs. Bramwell's pointed cough echoed through the ballroom. The housekeeper stood in the doorway, looking resigned to constantly interrupting them. Your Grace, there are visitors. Multiple visitors, actually. They've all arrived within minutes of each other, and they're all quite insistent on seeing you. Elena and Adrian separated reluctantly. Who? Adrian asked. Your father, Your Grace, Mrs. Bramwell said to Elena, and Lord and Lady Pemberton, and rather more surprisingly, the Countess of Blackwood. Adrian went very still. My grandmother is here? In the drawing room, looking extremely imperious and demanding tea. Elena had heard of the Countess of Blackwood, Adrian's maternal grandmother, a formidable woman who'd reportedly been furious when her daughter married Adrian's father and who'd cut off all contact with the Hale family after her daughter's death. What was she doing here now? They dressed quickly and descended to the drawing room to find an unusual gathering. Richard Ward sat stiffly on one settee, looking uncomfortable. Lord and Lady Pemberton occupied another, chatting quietly. And in the place of honor, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and Adrian's storm-colored eyes surveyed the room like a general planning a campaign. Grandmother, Adrian said carefully, this is unexpected. I should think so, considering we haven't spoken in 15 years. The Countess turned her sharp gaze on Elena. So this is the girl who finally cracked through your armor. Come here, child. Let me look at you properly. Elena approached, feeling like she was being evaluated for purchase. The Countess studied her with the same thoroughness Madame Laurent had shown, missing nothing. You have good bones, excellent posture, and you don't flinch under scrutiny, which shows either courage or foolishness. In your case, I suspect both. The Countess nodded approvingly. Yes, you'll do nicely. I'm so pleased to have your approval, Elena said dryly, earning a sharp laugh from the older woman. Oh, I like her. She has spine. The Countess turned back to Adrian. I came because I heard about the debacle at the Pemberton ball. The whole of London is talking about it. The jilted bride, the forged letter, the public confrontation. Quite the scandal. We're aware, Adrian said tightly. Don't get defensive. I'm not here to scold you. I'm here because... The Countess paused, something vulnerable crossing her aristocratic features. Because I made a mistake 15 years ago. When your mother died, I blamed you. Not rationally, not fairly, but I did. You survived and she didn't, and I couldn't bear to look at you without seeing her loss. So I cut you off, left you alone to deal with that monster of a father and all the responsibilities of the dukedom at 19. I was a coward. Adrian stood frozen, clearly not knowing how to respond. I'm not asking forgiveness, the Countess continued. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance to know you now, both of you, if you'll allow it. Elena felt Adrian's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. This was his choice to make. She could only support whatever he decided. Why now? Adrian asked quietly. Why after all this time? Because I heard what you said at that ball, about falling in love despite being terrified, about choosing to live instead of just survive. The Countess's eyes glistened. Your mother said something similar once. She told me that fear was a cage we build for ourselves, and love was the key. I didn't understand then. I was too afraid of losing her to appreciate having her. But you understand. And I'd like the chance to learn from my grandson what I couldn't learn from my daughter. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Tea would be lovely, grandmother. Stay as long as you'd like. The Countess's composure cracked just slightly, relief flooding her features. "Thank you." Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "We came for a similar reason, actually. To apologize for our part in the gossip and speculation, and to offer our support going forward. My wife and I have been quite vocal in society about the Duchess's grace and the Duke's honor. We thought you should know you have allies." "More than you might expect," Lady Pemberton added. "The tide has turned rather decisively in your favor. People are calling the Duchess the brave bride, and there's talk of commissioning a romantic ballad about the whole affair." Elena groaned. "Please, no ballads." "Too late, I'm afraid. These things take on a life of their own." Lady Pemberton smiled warmly. "But truly, you've won more than you know. Society loves nothing more than a good love story, and you've given them a spectacular one." Richard Ward had been silent throughout these exchanges, but now he stood, hat in hands. "Elena, might I have a word? Privately?" Elena glanced at Adrian, who nodded encouragingly. She led her father to the library, bracing herself for whatever lecture or apology was coming. But Richard surprised her. Instead of speaking immediately, he walked to the window and stood there, looking out over the estate grounds. "Your mother would have loved seeing you here," he said finally. "She always said you had a core of pure steel under all that quiet politeness. I never quite believed her. You were so dutiful, so compliant. I thought she was just being a doting mother." "Father, let me finish, please." Richard turned to face her. "When Lillian stole your wedding, I froze. I should have stopped it, should have dragged Thomas out of that chapel and horsewhipped him in the street. Instead, I stood there like a coward, hoping somehow it would all work out. And you saved yourself. You made a choice I couldn't have imagined making, and you turned disaster into triumph." He moved closer, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been a poor father to you, Elena. I favored Lillian because she was easy to understand, beautiful, charming, obvious in what she wanted. You were deeper, more complex. You challenged me to think, to see beyond surface appearances. I resented that when I should have treasured it." Elena's throat tightened. "You did your best." "My best was inadequate. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to try better now. I'd like to know my daughter, really know her, and perhaps be a proper grandfather when the time comes." "I'd like that," Elena whispered. "I'd like that very much." They embraced, and for the first time in years, Elena felt truly seen by her father. When they returned to the drawing room, they found Adrian deep in conversation with his grandmother, years of distance melting away as they discussed estate management and politics. The Pembertons were chatting with Mrs. Bramwell about preparations for the party Elena had proposed. "We've convinced your husband that a ball is an excellent idea," Lady Pemberton announced when she saw Elena. 3 weeks from now, when the scandal is still fresh enough to draw attention but distant enough to make your triumph clear." "I'm not sure I agreed to that," Adrian protested, but he was smiling. "You absolutely did. I have witnesses." Lady Pemberton stood, gathering her things. "We should go and let you prepare. But Your Grace," she addressed Elena directly, "thank you for reminding us all what real courage looks like." After the visitors left, Elena and Adrian stood in the empty drawing room, slightly dazed by everything that had just happened. "Your grandmother came back," Elena said. "After 15 years of silence, she came back." Adrian still seemed stunned. "Because we fell in love. Love does strange things to people. Terrifying things." But he was smiling as he pulled her close. "Though I'm starting to think terrifying might be worth it." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Hellcrest transformed from fortress to showcase as servants cleaned and polished. Musicians were hired, food was ordered, and invitations were sent across the county and beyond. The Countess threw her considerable weight behind the event, using her connections to ensure attendance from the most influential families. Elena worked alongside Mrs. Bramwell, the two women forming an unlikely partnership as they coordinated every detail. The housekeeper's initial disapproval had transformed into grudging respect, and now something approaching actual affection. "You've done well with this place," Mrs. Bramwell said one afternoon as they surveyed the ballroom, now gleaming and perfect. "Given it life again, given him life again." He did the same for me, Elena replied. Yes, I suppose he did. Funny how that works. The night of the ball arrived cold and clear, stars sharp in the winter sky. Elena dressed in a new gown Madame Laurent had created, midnight blue silk embroidered with silver stars, a conscious echo of Adrian's love of astronomy. Around her throat, she wore his mother's sapphire necklace. Adrian appeared in her doorway in his formal evening clothes, and his expression when he saw her made her breath catch. You're beautiful, he said simply. So are you. They descended the grand staircase together as the first guests arrived. Unlike the Pemberton ball, this time Elena felt no fear. This was her house, her husband at her side, her story to tell. The ballroom filled quickly, curious society figures, genuine well-wishers, and yes, a few scandal seekers hoping for more drama. But the overwhelming mood was celebratory. People smiled genuinely, congratulated them sincerely, and marveled at the transformation of Halecrest from tomb to palace. Two notable absences marked the evening. Lillian and Thomas Ashford had not been invited, and according to gossip, they wouldn't have been able to attend anyway. Thomas's father had indeed cut him off, and the couple had retreated to a small property in the countryside, shunned by the society Lillian had tried so hard to conquer. Elena refused to feel guilty about their downfall. They'd made their choices. She'd made hers. As the orchestra played and couples swirled across the floor, Richard Ward approached his daughter. "Might I have this dance?" he asked formally. Elena took his hand and they joined the waltz. It was the first time they danced together since she was a child. "You've exceeded every hope I had for you," Richard said quietly. "Not because you married a duke, but because you became exactly who you were meant to be. Strong, brave, true to yourself." "I had good teachers," Elena replied. "Mother taught me to find joy in words. You taught me duty and honor, and Adrian taught me that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites." When the dance ended, Adrian claimed her immediately, pulling her into another waltz with possessive grace. "Having fun, sup?" he murmured. "Surprisingly, yes. You?" "I'm dancing with my wife in my home, surrounded by people who've finally realized I'm not the mad duke they've been whispering about for 15 years. So yes, I'd say I'm having an excellent time." They spun across the floor, and Elena caught glimpses of friendly faces. Lord and Lady Pemberton, the Countess holding court in a corner, Mrs. Bramwell supervising refreshments with proprietary pride. As the music swelled, Adrian guided them toward the center of the ballroom, directly under the great chandelier. Then, without warning, he released her waist and took both her hands instead, facing her formally. The music ended. The ballroom fell silent. Adrian raised his voice to address the assembled crowd. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the reopening of Halecrest and the beginning of a new chapter for the Hale family. Most of you know by now that my marriage to Elena began unconventionally, born from scandal and necessity." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Elena tensed, not sure where he was going with this. "But what started as convenience has become something far more valuable. My wife has taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, that love isn't weakness, but the greatest strength, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments we don't plan." He turned back to Elena, speaking to her but loud enough for everyone to hear. 3 weeks ago, I married you to save you from humiliation. Tonight, before all these witnesses, I want to marry you again, not as a duke claiming his duchess, but as a man who loves his wife. Elena, will you dance with me? Not because it's expected, not because society demands it, but because you choose to? Because I choose you, every day, for the rest of our lives? Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she took his offered hand. Yes. Always yes. The orchestra began again, a waltz written specifically for this moment. Lady Pemberton had commissioned it as a wedding gift. As Elena and Adrian danced, other couples gradually joined them, but Elena barely noticed. There was only Adrian's eyes on hers, his hand steady at her waist, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. When the waltz ended, Adrian pulled her close and kissed her in front of everyone. Not the chaste kiss appropriate for public viewing, but deep and claiming and full of promise. The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. "Scandal," Elena murmured against his lips. Let them talk, Adrian replied. I'm done caring what anyone thinks except you. The party continued until dawn, music and laughter filling every corner of Halecrest. But eventually, the last guest departed. The musicians packed their instruments, and Elena and Adrian found themselves alone in the empty ballroom as servants began clearing away the remnants of the celebration. We did it, Elena said, leaning against Adrian's shoulder. We actually did it. What did we do exactly? Won, survived, proved everyone wrong. She looked up at him. Fell in love against all odds and came out stronger for it. That sounds like something from one of your novels. Life imitates art sometimes. Adrian pulled her toward the ballroom doors. Come on, there's one more thing I want to show you. He led her through the quiet manor and up to the north tower. But instead of stopping at his study, he continued up another flight of stairs Elena had never climbed before, until they emerged onto the tower roof. The view stole her breath. Halecrest spread below them, the manor, the grounds, the estate stretching toward the horizon. Above, stars blazed in the clear winter sky, impossibly bright and close. I used to come up here when I was young, Adrian said quietly, after my mother died, after my father would rage. I'd climb up here and look at the stars and remind myself there was something bigger than my small, terrible world. And now? Now I come up here and think about how my world got bigger in the best possible way. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them looking up at the infinite sky. I thought I'd spend my life alone, Elena. Isolated by choice, protected by walls and distance. You changed everything. You changed everything for me too. I was so focused on being proper, being dutiful, being what everyone expected. You showed me I could be myself, and that would be enough. They stood together in the cold night air, watching stars wheel overhead and feeling the solid ground beneath their feet. Below them, Halecrest glowed with lamplight, no longer a fortress or a tomb, but a home. Thank you, Adrian said softly, for saying yes in that chapel, for giving me a chance, for loving me despite all the reasons you shouldn't. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for standing beside me when I needed it most, for being terrified of love and choosing it anyway. We chose each other, Adrian corrected. That's the important part. Not fate, not convenience, not necessity. Choice. Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her whole world in less than 2 months. Then I choose you, Adrian Hale. Every day, every moment, for the rest of my life. And I choose you, Elena Hale, my Duchess, my wife, my love. They kissed under the stars, two people who'd been broken separately and healed together, who'd survived scandal and betrayal and doubt to find something real and true and worth fighting for. Far below, in the village beyond Halecrest's gates, people would talk for generations about the brave bride who'd turned humiliation into triumph, who'd married the Iron Duke in a chapel and melted his frozen heart. They'd compose ballads and tell stories, each version growing more romantic and less accurate. But Elena and Adrian didn't care about the stories people told. They knew the truth, that love wasn't a rescue or a fairy tale, but a choice made every day. A decision to be vulnerable despite fear, to trust despite risk, to build something together that was stronger than anything either could create alone. The woman who'd arrived at a chapel expecting to become a bride, only to find her wedding stolen, had lost everything that day. And gained something far more valuable. She'd gained herself, her strength, her courage, her voice. She'd gained a partner who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. She'd gained a home that was truly hers, a life built on honesty instead of obligation. Most importantly, she'd gained the knowledge that she didn't need to be rescued. She could save herself. Though having someone choose to stand beside her through it all, that made the victory so much sweeter. As dawn broke over Halecrest, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena and Adrian finally descended from the tower. They walked hand in hand through their home, past rooms that had been reopened to light and life, past walls that no longer felt like barriers, but protection. In the entrance hall, Mrs. Bramwell waited with tea and fresh bread, breakfast prepared for the Duke and Duchess who danced until dawn. "Good morning, Your Grace." "Your Grace," she said with what might actually have been a smile. The staff wishes to know if you'll be hosting another ball soon. They found last night most enjoyable. Elena and Adrian exchanged glances, both remembering the chaos of preparation. Perhaps in the spring, Elena said diplomatically. An excellent choice, Your Grace. Spring at Halcrest is quite beautiful. Mrs. Bramwell poured tea with practiced efficiency. If I may say so, it's good to see this house alive again. You've both done well. It was the highest praise the housekeeper would ever give, and Elena treasured it. After breakfast, exhausted but happy, they climbed the stairs to their rooms, Adrian's rooms, which had gradually become their rooms, the Duchess's apartments now serving as Elena's private study, where she could read and write in peace. They fell into bed still wearing last night's finery, too tired to properly undress. I love you, Adrian murmured, already half asleep. I love you too, Elena replied, nestling closer. And there, in the light of a new day, the Duke and Duchess of Hale slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd survived the worst and chosen the best. The scandal that had begun with betrayal ended with triumph. The marriage that had started with necessity ended with love. And the woman who'd walked into a chapel expecting one future and found herself thrust into another had discovered something most people spend lifetimes searching for: the courage to choose herself, the strength to demand honesty, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the greatest victories come from the moments when everything falls apart, because it's only when everything breaks that you can rebuild it properly. Elena Ward had been broken at that altar, but Elena Hale, the Duchess of Hale, the brave bride, the woman who'd turned public humiliation into personal triumph, she was whole. And she was exactly where she was meant to be.